Expanding education. My name is Catherine Baisden. I'm the project manager for the Partnership for Expanding Education Research in STEM, or PEERS, data hub at the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research, ICPSR. The PEERS Data Hub is funded by the National Science Foundation and is a collaborative initiative with the American Education Research Association, AERA, and ICPSR. The PEERS Data Hub features ways to explore and discover data sets for secondary research and analysis, avenues for connecting with colleagues and like-minded researchers, and resources for data and research management. If you would like to know more and also register for upcoming webinars for free, such as this one, please visit the PEERS Data Hub website at www.peersdatahub.net. This webinar will introduce you to concepts in which you can make data you have collected or plan to collect to be usable by other researchers, which will extend your research impact exponentially. In this webinar, the discussion will include data sharing platforms, repositories or archives, what makes data fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, data linkages, use of AI to produce good, steady metadata, and how to track the impact of your data as it is used by others. Before we hear from our presenter, I just want to remind you that one of PEERS features is a data discovery page where you can find links to resources and that are discussed maybe today, as well as many other things. Today, we are hearing from Dr. Allison Flaster, Program Director of the PEERS Project. Allison Flaster is an assistant research scientist at ICPSR. She directs the ICPSR Consortium Archive on Education Data and the ICPSR-AERA Education Data Sharing Initiative. Her research focuses on college access and success for marginalized students. Allison has a PhD in higher education from the University of Michigan and is a faculty affiliate of the Michigan Institute for Data Science, MIDAS. I would like to say thank you in advance, Dr. Flaster, and your contributions as attendees. Dr. Flaster, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thanks, Catherine. Well, as Catherine said, my name is Allison Flaster. I'm an assistant research scientist at ICPSR, where I work here with the PEERS Data Hub. And I'm here today to talk about extending the impact of your research by making your data reusable. That's a lot of what we do here at ICPSR, and that PEERS Data Hub is here to assist you with. So if you're here in this webinar, you probably already know about the PEERS Data Hub, but if you're new to hearing about us, just so you know that the PEERS Data Hub stands for the Partnership for Expanding Education Research in STEM. Essentially what we are is a web-based hub. So you can go to our webpage and find resources that will connect and educate and build a community around STEM education data. So things like data sharing, data reuse. We offer webinars like this one, the Discover Data page, like Catherine mentioned, where we have tons of links to different secondary data sets you can use. We have resource guides, and I'm going to be covering quite a few of them during this presentation today and providing links to those that can be really helpful for all stages of the research data lifecycle. We also have a help desk, so you can contact us with any questions you might have about STEM education data use, and we are here to provide guidance. The PEERS Data Hub is hosted at ICPSR, but we're in collaboration with AERA. So this is a joint effort between our two organizations, and we are funded by the NSF. So our agenda for today, I'm really thinking it has three main stages in this webinar. We're going to start with an introduction to the topic. I'm going to provide some key definitions about data reuse. Oftentimes we use these terms without saying what we mean, so I'm going to be really clear about how we make data reusable and what data reuse means. And I'm also going to give the rationale for why it's important. And then I'm going to turn to what do you need to do before you carry out your research to make sure that the data that you're facilitating data reuse that is legal and ethical. And then we're going to transition to what are the things you should do during and after you've conducted the research to make sure that you're facilitating data reuse that is easy for others. So that's our agenda today. I want to stop for a second though and make sure that you have this resource. If you go to this website, so you can either use the bit.ly link or you can use the QR code, it will get you to a resource page that has the entire slideshow, as well as the different links to the different resources I'm going to talk about today. That way you don't have to worry about writing down, links or clicking here or there or scrambling to try to find these resources on the web. You will have all these websites at your disposal and you can go peruse them later, so that this way you can just kind of sit back, relax, and watch the slideshow and think of any questions you might have to put in the chat. Okay, so getting back to definitions, data reuse. Broadly, when people use this term data reuse, they're referring to when data are used by those who did not create them. So that's, again, a very broad term. Oftentimes people use this term referring to things like replication data sets or data extracts from secondary data, or aggregate statistics. People will use the term data reuse to refer to sharing like giant Excel tables of aggregate or descriptive statistics. But in the purpose for this presentation, and specifically for this webinar and our purposes, I'm using a narrower definition of data reuse. What I'm talking about today is when you're trying to facilitate sharing microdata, so the underlying data created in your study, when you make those data reusable, is when people are able to use those data when they did not create them, and they are able to use that microdata to derive new insights and answer new research questions. So they are taking your data and being able to kind of extend the research uses from the data that you collected. So that's what I'm referring to in this webinar. Then my guess is if you're here and you're interested in data reuse and making your data reusable, you probably already, I might be preaching to the choir a little bit, but I do think it's helpful to talk about the reasons why data reuse is important. Our friends and colleagues at the Qualitative Data Repository give a really good framework for thinking of 3 different reasons why people should do data reuse, facilitate data reuse. The first being an altruistic reason. It will benefit society and other researchers if you make your data reusable to others. I mean, you can think about all the benefits that come to society from advancing knowledge on the topic that you're studying, as well as making data available to other researchers so that they can conduct research as well. I mean, that almost goes without explanation that research should be a public good. But there are also other reasons that could be a little more instrumental, but still important. And that is that data reuse can benefit your career. It seems important to acknowledge the fact that, we are all doing this work because we're either students or faculty or whatever it might be, or staff, but we're doing research because part of it is it's our job to do research, and it is important to acknowledge that. And so I'm going to talk about some ways in this presentation about how you can make sure that by sharing your data, you are kind of getting the word out about the impact that you are having in your field. And then another reason would be injunctive, which is that it is required, basically. More and more funders and publishers are requiring researchers to share their data, the data that is collected with the funding that is provided by a funder or the data that underlies a published paper. So more and more, we are being, the expectation is that we will share our data. So hopefully through this presentation, I will present some ways in which how you can do it most effectively. So, getting back to the whole instrumental idea of why we should share our data, I thought it would be interesting to go to the research. This study looked specifically at the effect or the impact of making data available in an open repository for researchers to use, and what the impact would be on citation rates. So people who are in Vision found that studies that made the data available in a public repository received 9% more citations than similar studies for which the data was not made available. So you can see the impact right there, providing those data sets that brings people to look at your research. And then once they look at your research, it's more likely to be cited within their own studies. And oftentimes people don't want to make their data available for reuse because they're worried about getting scooped, or the idea that, if they put the data out there, other people will just kind of rush in and publish all the possible papers. And then, that will have a negative impact on their career. But according to this paper, it's the opposite. They concluded that the researchers who made the data available kind of had this head start in being able to use their data. So they made the data available, they kind of immediately published a work stream of papers. There was kind of a life cycle of publishing off that data. And then other researchers would come in a few years later and publish their own papers after the original researchers' work had kind of tapered off. So in terms of the life cycle of a data set, not only were the original researchers getting kind of the benefit of being able to, they have that expertise in that data, were able to publish immediately from it, but then other researchers would come and find additional insights and publish on things the original researchers had not been interested in or thought to study. So it kind of continued the influence of their work by opening it up to other researchers. Another thing to consider in terms of your research impact is that sadly, most of our publications are rarely cited. So you can see from this research by Amin and Mabe that in the social sciences, the average citation per article is actually 1. So one thing to consider is when you make your data available for others, you will also be publishing documentation that accompanies it. And the more your data is used, more people are turning to that documentation and citing it in their own work as an important resource. And again, that helps kind of grow your impact and your network of people using your work. So for instance, here is a user guide for an NCES study, the Early Child Longitudinal Study, kindergarten class of 98-99. And I'm just curious, take a minute and think if you can guess the number of citations, according to Google Scholar, for this user guide, given that the average citation is 1 for a work in the social sciences. So the number of citations according to Google Scholar is 414, which is, pretty significant. So that's just an example, but, keep in mind that not only will you be sharing your work, but also the documentation and preparation of that work is scholarly activity in its own right that also will contribute to your impact. And then getting back to the injunctive reasons to share data, again, funding agencies increasingly do require it. This is an example of the NSF's current data sharing policy. So they expect that investigators are expected to share with other researchers at no more than incremental cost and within a reasonable time, the primary data, samples, collections, et cetera, other supporting materials created in the course of work under NSF awards. So that is the expectation currently. And then, well, that is the current guidance. You may or may not be aware that there are additional policies in development. So in 2022, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, or OSTP, under the direction of Alondra Nelson, released new guidelines on public access to the results of federally funded research. So these guidelines are kind of colloquially known as the Nelson Memo. Then the Nelson Memo directs federal agencies to create policies that ensure immediate and free access to primary data and the publications produced with federal funding. So these federal agencies are now working on their data sharing policies, updating the policies to match this guidance, and they will go into effect by the end of 2025. So, within about a year and a half, not only will people be needing to share their data, but they will need to be sharing them in a way that provides free access and immediate access to that data immediately upon publication. This really makes knowing how to share your data just all the more important. All right, so hopefully I really laid the foundation. I have you convinced that making data reusable is important. It will be a great benefit to your career. So how do we do this? The most critical thing to do is to make sure that data reuse is legal and ethical for other researchers. And this really all comes back to the informed consent. So working at ICPSR, it's really unfortunate. You see situations where people come and they want to share their data, but then, when they share the documentation around the collection of their data and you see the informed consent, it becomes clear that they don't actually have the authority to share that data based on what they told people they would do with that data in the informed consent. So really what it comes down to is in this informed consent, if you are collecting data, via survey or from other participants, you need to tell people who their data will be shared with, in what form, and under what conditions. That all needs to be in the informed consent. People need to know where their data will end up. It's important to know that there can be different forms of data available to different types of people. So for instance, you as the PI or the data collector might be able to access identified data. You would only make de-identified data available to other researchers. Or you might make, if the data is not sensitive or not able to identify people, you might make this data publicly available, or have a subset of the data that is maybe on more sensitive topics or populations only available by restricted access to researchers who meet certain conditions in order to work with that data. So it doesn't have to be kind of a one size fits all approach, but you do need to tell participants exactly what you will do and then follow what you say you will do. So language in informed consent is critical to being able to share data down the road. ICPSR has a great resource. They provide model language, basically, that you can use to kind of craft your own informed consent. So here's an example from the website. If you follow that link, it will tell you language to avoid using an informed consent. It will provide model language. It will address specific concerns that people have about informed consent in different language. So you can really walk through and see, okay, this is what I should be saying. This is what I shouldn't be saying. And it is a great resource considering that I'd say very few of us receive any sort of training on how to make data available, when we're learning how to conduct research. Okay, so that's there for you as a resource. A question we receive at ICPSR under these circumstances is, well, I'm supposed to share my data per my agreement with the funding agency, but what if I promise participants or data providers that I wouldn't share their data with anyone? And, if you said that you wouldn't share their data, then you have to follow what you said you would do. So in situations like that, there's the possibility to go back and reconsent participants, or go back and renegotiate data agreements with data providers based on the consultation with your institutional review board. But I guess, the best thing you can do is not get in a situation in the first place and promise that you will only keep the data to yourself, when increasingly that is just not an option under different expectations of funding agencies and providers. So another way to ensure that your data reuse is legal and ethical for others is to create a data management plan. So a data management plan, they usually state what data will be created, how it will be created, and it will outline the plans for sharing and preservation of the data. It's basically a blueprint that kind of walks through the entire life cycle of how you'll manage your data during the study. What you'll want to really pay attention to in terms of making sure that data's reuse is legal and ethical for others is to really look at your plans to obtain IRB approval, look at legal constraints and requirements, think through, is FERPA relevant here or other kind of conditions on data's use. Really think about how you'll manage disclosure risk for the data and how you will secure the data. So critical components to a data management plan, if you are funded by a federal agency, you have to make these anyways, but even if you are not funded by a federal agency, these are really important. I can't stress that enough, that everyone should make one at the outset of a study. And if you need resources to help you in making one, ICPSR has those available at that website. Okay, so assuming you have your foundation, you are legally able to share data with others, you carry out your study, you collect your data, you're either in the process or you're done with data collection. What do you do to make that data available to others and make reuse really easy for them? So in the data archiving community, we talk a lot about making data fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And really that refers to the ability for machines to find, read, and use data. But it also refers to kind of humans and their ability to interact with data as well, of course. And I think for researchers, what we have a pretty good agency to influence would be whether the data is findable and reusable. So I'm going to start by talking about what you can do to make your data as findable as possible. And I would say three things are key. You need to make your data available in a location that's really visible to the education research community. So people need to go to a place where they can expect to find data like yours and find it. And the way they find it is through really good metadata and a data citation. Now I'm going to talk through each of those in turn. So first, a visible location. So there are plenty of repositories where you can put your study data for others to access and reuse that data. Repositories are places where users can store study-related materials. So for example, you might be aware that your institution has some sort of data repository. Provided an example here from the University of Michigan, or Maryland. Here at Michigan, we have the Deep Blue repository. And these are really for people who, study and work at those institutions to have a safe place, a permanent place to put their materials. And then people from outside of the institution can come and access those materials. But it's really for use for people at that specific institution. There are also general open science repositories like OSF, which is really great for all different disciplines and for folks who want to share all their different study-related materials across the entire project. You might be familiar with GitHub, which is really focused towards kind of the computer science community and coding. There are social science-oriented repositories like OpenICPSR, where social scientists tend to put their own data and self-publish their own data. Similarly, with Harvard Dataverse, users can self-publish their own data there as well. And then there are a subgroup of repositories that are special collections. So these would be data archives, and they are places where they tend to be like a library. So librarians work there. They create collections of data that are explicitly intended for others to reuse. So ICPSR would be one of those, the qualitative data repository. The benefit of putting your data in a data archive is that it is really looked after by these specialists, these librarians, and made sure that the data is as accessible, reusable as possible. The downsides of archives as opposed to repository is that the data is then managed by the library. So if, for instance, you wanted to constantly update your data, you had lots of refreshes of your data, archives might not be the best choice, just because then you have to constantly work with the librarians and work the data through the systems. But in terms of things like if you have restricted data, archives can be a great choice because the archive staff will take care of ensuring that only those people who are qualified to use the data do so, and in an appropriate environment like a restricted data enclave. And then they also do disclosure review on output to make sure it can't identify people. So it just kind of depends on the needs of your data, on how open and out there in the community you want it to be. But whichever one you pick, I would encourage you to pick something where other social scientists who do education research also tend to look for data. So good metadata. Metadata is data about data. It includes study level metadata like your study title, the description of your study, and keywords. Good study level metadata makes it possible for others to find your data in search engines. So if you've ever gone and done a search somewhere and gotten back suggestions that don't really have anything to do with what you were looking for, you can blame poor keywords for that. So this is makes it really critical for getting very accurate searches and people finding exactly what they're looking for. And good study level metadata makes it possible for others to understand what your data is about. So if you've ever gotten like a spreadsheet or something filled with data and no description whatsoever of what's in the spreadsheet, you know how frustrating that can be to not have a really good description of the contents of the data. So I just wanted to give you an example of the importance of metadata and what it looks like when you do some kind of meh metadata versus great metadata. On the left, you have my first pass at writing metadata for a study I'm working on. So I have letters of recommendation to engineering programs, PhD programs at an institution, and I'm doing content analysis to see if the people discussed in the letters of recommendation are spoken about or written about in different ways, depending on the backgrounds of those individuals. So do letter writers tend to talk about women in a different way than they talk about men, or are there differences by underrepresented minority status, et cetera? So I, just sitting down to write up some metadata, I gave a title to my study and suggested some keywords. But then recognizing that that doesn't provide all the kind of detail and nuance of my study, and it wouldn't tell another person about many different facets of it, I used a tool that I'm going to share with you next to produce some great metadata. So you'll see on the right, that is the metadata that I came up with after using this tool. It really made some great suggestions about how I can improve my title. It added some additional detail. It added the referencing the United States where the study took place and the time period in which my data is collected from. It added some additional keywords to pick up on the fact that, like, oh yeah, my study is about evaluating candidates for admission to graduate school and whether there are bias in those letters. So it really helps kind of flesh out your understanding of the study. So this is the tool I used. It's called Turbo Curator, and it's a collaboration between ICPSR and Harvard Dataverse. It's basically an AI-assisted tool that you provide information about your study, and Turbo Curator comes back after querying ChatGPT and gives you some very targeted, specific recommendations for how to improve your metadata. You don't have time for me to kind of walk through it all today, but these are the basic steps. So you would go to Harvard Dataverse and add a data set to your study, enter your basic metadata like I did on the left in that previous slide, and then edit the data set and say, I want to add Turbo Curator by ICPSR to this metadata, and then it will query ChatGPT after you add some kind of additional information. So I added like my abstract and summary to Turbo Curator, and it came back with some really great recommendations for improving my title and keywords. So after you get those suggestions, you could either just delete the entry in Harvard Dataverse, or you could go on to publish it on Harvard Dataverse. So you don't have to share your data on Harvard Dataverse to use this tool. But the link is in the notes, so you can go and use that tool on your own if you like. And then lastly, to make your data as findable as possible, you always want to cite your own data and make sure others cite your data. I didn't even know that one could cite data until I started working at ICPSR, but it's a really important practice for making sure that anyone who created the data gets credit for their scholarly contribution. So this is a general format for a data citation. You can see an example of how that looks for the Texas Higher Education Opportunity Project, which is data distributed at ICPSR. The critical thing is the DOI at the end of this entry, and that is the permanent digital object identifier that makes it so that you can always come back to this location and this place and this data set, and it won't get lost on the internet, but there is a specific place where you can go and find information about this data set. If you want practice generating data citations, Scribr has a great tool. You can go to that link and enter information and it will generate a citation for you. We also have fun ICPSR videos there as well about why you should cite data if you are interested. So I'd also note that if you're going to cite your data, and you should, definitely want to also include it in other kind of public materials to get the word out about your study and help encourage a culture of valuing the work of sharing data. So I would recommend that you include your data products, so your data sets that you share, your documentation and user guides, et cetera, on your CV and other public materials. I've noticed people in Europe are very good about this. In their email signature, they will include links to their most recent, say, publications or data sets that they've produced. And I think that's a great practice. There's no reason why we shouldn't be getting the word out about kind of the impact of our work through sharing through our emails, for instance. So that's just one idea. The citation itself will allow you to track the impact of your data. So if you cite your data and other people cite your data, then people in data repositories such as Dataverse or ICPSR or OSF or wherever can track the impact of your work. So here's an example of College and Beyond 2, which is a study that I was involved with. And you can see here that thus far after releasing the data last year, we've got 2 people who have used the data in data-related publications. And you can see those publications here. So that's a way that you can very clearly track the impact of your work. And as more people learn about your work, your research, and they use store data in their studies and cite it. That will allow other repositories, when they see that citation, they will then include them in their bibliographies, and you can very clearly have a statistic that tracks the impact of your work. Okay, so another area of the FAIR principles that I think are something that researchers can have an impact on is making their data as reusable as possible. And there are a couple things to consider here. So you're definitely going to want to provide clarity around who can legally use the data and for what purpose. So OSF, I think, has great resources on this, and I've shared the link. You can go right to their website and see a description of all the different licenses that you can choose for your data when you make it available on a repository. But really what you're trying to do is just tell people, like, yes, you can use this for commercial purposes, or no, you can't. Yes, anyone can use the data and redistribute it as well, or no, they can't. It just makes it really clear to people, like, hey, my data's out here and you can do X, Y, and Z with it. And that helps people understand, if they can reuse it and towards what purpose. Another thing you're going to want to do is provide really thorough documentation about your data, and also provide opportunities for data linkage. I'm going to talk about those in more detail. Sorry, just realized you couldn't see that slide. Okay. So here is the link to OSF. And here is documentation about the data and opportunities for data linkage. All right, so documentation. It's really important that you as a data producer remember that so much of the information you have in your mind about the data, the study design, all the different nuances about the variables, et cetera, that you have to somehow share that information with others who are going to be reusing your data. And really, since you can't sit down and have a conversation with everyone who wants to reuse your data, the best way to do that is to thoroughly document it in user guides, README notes, questionnaires, things like that. So you need to provide people with as much information as you possibly can through documentation. I would say the best way to do that, if you haven't created documentation before, is to find an existing study that you think is well documented and copy its format. So for instance, when I was working on that Collagen Beyond 2 study and we needed to create documentation, how do we create a good user guide? We looked to the NCES studies, which I think have great user guides and lots of detail about their studies. And we just kind of used that as a framework for knowing, okay, this is what we need to talk about and let people know about all the different decisions that we make. And then data linkage. So this might be something that you hadn't thought of, or that wasn't immediately obvious when you think about ways to kind of amplify the impact of your research. But I think this is a way that can be really interesting to allowing others to really extend upon the insights from your study. So if you add certain types of keys to your data, that allows for linkage to contextual type of data that can really inform deeper understanding of the context in which people are situated that you are doing your research about. So for instance, geography, we know that where people live has a huge impact on different social processes. Schools, obviously very important for education research. Occupations, also critically important, especially for kind of the trajectory of learning into the workforce. And there are different codes you can include for all of these that will allow other researchers to pull in data about schools, about geographical areas, about careers and occupations that would really expand the impact of your data. The only thing to be aware of is that the more data you link in, more contextual data to your data, the more it is potentially disclosive and able to re-identify participants. So you need to kind of strike a balance there of not providing too much information, but providing some so that people can better understand the environments people live, work, and study in. So I wanted to provide some resources to facilitate contextual data for linkage. On the left, you see commonly used data on schools and communities that you might already be aware of. NCES has the public school Common Core of data and the private school survey universe data. And those, will tell you lots about schools, things like, free and reduced price lunch, participation, teacher to student ratio, all those kind of contextual information that's important. Similarly, IPEDS college data at the post-secondary level, data on enrollments, on graduation rates, census data about communities. Those tend to be fairly well known. But here on the right are some additional resources that you might find useful. The National Neighborhood Data Archive is great. It has just tons of information about different aspects of people's neighborhoods. So, everything from crime to education and training services to law enforcement, internet access, all these kind of contextual information around the neighborhoods where schools and people live. If you have any sort of zip code information, you are able to link to those data sets. Similarly, the IPUM's contextual determinants of health. That provides great information about disparities across many different dimensions. So, for instance, differences by race and ethnicity on things like education, employment, income. Similarly, differences by sexual and gender minority status, political differences. And so really being able to look at kind of systems of inequality, if that's of interest to you, connecting that at the neighborhood level to your data would be possible with geographic keys. And then the COVID-19 School Data Hub is also another great resource. If you have information at the school level, you can pull in this data hub that has information about different COVID policies, schools open, closed, health policies, et cetera, across time during the pandemic that you could add to your data if you had school level information like the NCES school IDs, for instance. So just wanted to let people know about some great resources. So to kind of sum up the entire presentation, to really create reusable data that allows other people to really extend the impact of the work that you did. You want to ensure your ability to share the data in your informed consent and other legal documents. You want to put your data in a visible repository or archive, and one that's visible to education researchers. You want to describe it thoroughly with metadata. You want to cite your data and add it to your public materials, put it on your CV, your signature, et cetera, and encourage others to cite data as well. You need to make it clear who can use the data, provide thorough documentation, and as kind of the extra cherry on top, provide opportunities for data linkage. That's kind of the next level. All right, and of course, if you have any questions along the way, consult the Peers Data Hub. There's our website again. We have tons of resources about all of these different topics on the hub. You can email us. There's our email address. We're happy to answer individual questions. We're basically here to help and support you in making your data reusable for others. All right, so that's the presentation, and it looks like we have some time to answer questions. So I'm going to stop and see what is in the chat.
No questions that we haven't answered yet, Allison, but we encourage people to ask any questions that the team and Allison can answer.
Well, if there aren't any questions, then I guess we have we're able to break a little early, but I do want to, thanks, Samira. I do want to definitely encourage people to reach out to us at the Peers Data Hub. We're here to help. So if anything, if any questions along the way, don't hesitate to be in touch. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for joining.
Question that came in. Was there? No. I'd like to thank everybody for sharing the great resources. I'd like to thank Dr. Faster for sharing this great information about reusing data and making it a more of an impact. And I'd like to thank the audience for joining us today. And I would like to shout out to Karani, another project manager here at ICPSR, for giving us an assist in this webinar. So I hope you all have a great day.